All right. Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening. Welcome. This is your friend and your host, currently, Tony, and welcome to this amazing interview with Michael Fall. And today we'll talk about addiction. Not only what is addiction, but also how to overcome it. And our guest for today is Michael Fall. So, with honor and pleasure, let's welcome Michael. Hi, Michael. Welcome.
Hi, Corinne. Thanks so much for having me on. I appreciate it, and hopefully there'll be some value for people in here. So yeah, my name is Michael Fall. I own Insight-Based Coaching, which is a coaching company here in Guelph, Ontario, Canada, where I live. I started that in 2015, not coincidentally, right after I met the principles, or more specifically, met the teachings of Sydney Banks. And currently my business or my clientele base seems to be it's sort of three-tiered. So I have leaders and professionals on one hand, so where I'm working with managers, high-end salespeople, professionals. Then I have a life coaching branch, which seems to be a little bit more around day-to-day stress and anxiety, things of that nature. And then the third sort of level that I'm working at right now, or the third thing that I'm focused on, is what I call the Joyful Life Project. And the Joyful Life Project is currently it's being offered to people, young adults, old teens and young adults that are struggling with barriers. So whether that's poverty barriers or educational barriers, but it's geared to helping people that are disenfranchised in society find their way in, find their way back to society and back to the life that they want to live. So that's kind of what is underneath the umbrella of insight-based coaching at this moment. And I'll just, the last thing to add, I ran across the principles in 2015. Everything that I do in my coaching work is informed by the three principles. It is the foundation upon which all of my coaching sits. It is not necessarily what I teach, because I typically don't, but it does provide the grounding from which I approach my coaching work. Yeah.
Wonderful. So, Michael, I see that so many people they are suffering from addiction to porn, alcohol, relationship, love, drugs. So, what is the cause of addiction? Why do people get addicted?
That's a very big question, Karen, and I can only answer it in relation to myself. So if that's okay, that's the only area that I have expertise in is me. So I can say that my addictions and my addictive behaviors effectively began out of a poor relationship to myself. There were things that occurred, some might say occurred to me early in my life, that when I still saw the world from this perspective of it being imposed on me and not the other way around, getting into the habitual and then addiction of using drugs and alcohol as a way of escaping reality, is kind of how it started for me. So if we're speaking to the 3P community, then the obvious answer might be it begins with a misunderstanding of thought. But in a practical sense, what pushed me in the direction of destructive behavior, and you mentioned a few of them with relationships or love and porn and drugs and alcohol. I mean, guilty, not guilty, but guilty of all of them. Was what started it all was really a feeling of disenfranchisement, a feeling of lack of self-worth, a feeling of lack of confidence and security. And because of that, I simply reached for something that in that moment felt better for me, that made life bearable, made it better. And from then, once you're relying on something to bring about a change in your feelings, that's a slippery slope. From that point on, it's very, very easy to to get caught in the always seeking for something external to you to bring some semblance of happiness or joy to your life. Yeah.
What made the shift in your life? What made you come out of that?
Yeah, so that's where the conversation for me gets very interesting. I came out of it with the real. So I'll be just completely truthful and straightforward. What brought me out of it was realizing that I was making all this shit up. That's what I heard in my mind, September 18th, 2015. I had been listening to, and I'll tell this story. I'll try to make it quick, but I had been listening to a Sid Banks audio that a friend of mine had sent me. Someone that I've known for many years. His name is Silas. He's a young man that I used to train at the gym that I used to own. And I didn't have a lot of contact with him. He moved away. And then one day I get an email from him, or a message on Facebook it was. And he says, "Hey, check this out. You might like it." And in that check it out, you might like this, were a couple of Sid Banks titles, the Long Beach Lectures, the Hawaii Lectures, and I forget the other one that's available now fairly commonly. It escapes me, and a couple of books. Anyway, so for some reason, Silas sends me this out of the blue. I hadn't talked to him in ages. And he sends it to me with a note attached that says, "This is in payment to all of the years of free training." Okay, whatever. So that's kind of a feel-good part. I didn't ask for it. I hadn't had any contact. It shows up. And for some reason, Lord knows why, I was sober that night. So in the midst of everything that I was doing, when this came in, I happened to be straight. And I sat down and I listened to it. And the first thing I listened to was the Long Beach Lectures. And 5 minutes into the Long Beach Lectures, I struggle to describe the depth of what I experienced. To say that I was crying is an understatement. To say that I was laughing is an understatement. It was this, if someone had been watching me, there's a good chance what they would have thought they were perceiving was some kind of break from reality or a mental breakdown of some kind. What I heard in the moment that all of that was occurring, and by the way, this all happens 5 minutes into the Long Beach Lectures. I've gone back over the Long Beach Lectures so many times. There's nothing in the 5 minutes. There's nothing that would obviously point to a change occurring. But I was listening, and what I heard in my own mind was, and again, pardon the language, but for clarity, what I heard was, "Holy fuck, you've been making it all up." And in that moment, everything changed. So whatever occurred, whatever was held in that moment, whatever touched me in that moment, liberated me, if you will. And it's the most powerful, it's one of the most powerful experiences I've ever had. And the clarity with which I knew that, oh my gosh, I've been making it all up, changed everything. So I went from someone who was an addict to someone who wasn't in a split second. Now, that is not to say that I don't have some characteristics that I still enjoy. But what changed was that I saw that I had a choice. So rather than being a victim to whatever it was that was creating this addictive behavior in myself, this desire for a change or this desire to be different than how I was experiencing life, left. And I was left with a very clear, and getting clearer and clearer over the years, appreciation for the reality that I was an addict to the thinking that I was having that was running in the background of my consciousness that was insisting that I wasn't good enough, that I wasn't worthy enough, that I wasn't capable enough. And in that split second moment where I heard or saw, or however we describe it, all of that thinking fell away. And it's not that I don't get caught up in it. We all do. Everyone who's experienced some form of shift in perspective, there's always modulation, I guess is what I mean. But what I saw and what's been occurring since is just this ever deepening understanding that we actually create our world and we have the power to do that. So maybe the biggest shift that occurred for me was transitioning from a world of victimhood to a world of I'm the creator. Yeah, so I hope that answered the question, kind of, Karen. We might play that pronunciation game again a little bit, Karen. But
Wonderful.
yeah.
So that experience,
Mm-hmm.
how would you describe it? Would you call it an insight or an enlightening experience?
Realization or an enlightenment. A little bit of column A, a little bit of column B. I'm loath to call it an enlightenment moment because I'm not enlightened. On the same hand, I'm comfortable with very, very small e enlightenment, like really small e, because it really did. Yeah, it's such a good question, distinguishing between those two. What I experienced, and I'm going to sort of talk around the question for a second, what I experienced was so powerful. If we want to call it a realization, it was the most powerful realization I've ever had. And it changed everything about my life. My perceptions of everything shifted. So, that's a hard question to answer, Corinne, because, I don't want to call myself enlightened because I know I'm not. And it felt like it was more than, the realization of I create my reality with thought. There was a depth to it that I feel is somewhere in between those two words, that lives somewhere in between those two descriptions of the experience. Yeah.
Wonderful. It's like something magical. I've seen people having their shift, but not that fast as a beginner, like just in the first 5 minutes. Wonderful.
Yeah, it was, I mean, and maybe a little background here. I don't know. I was a seeker for a long time. Studied philosophy at university. Looked into many different religious traditions. Have always been interested in the world of spirituality. But when this happened, I wasn't looking. I was so committed to the lifestyle that I was living that any sort of seeking or desire for that had fallen away. So yeah, to have it come out of the blue the way it did was as much of a surprise for me as I think it was for people that knew me well in that time. And of course, since that experience that did happen in a split second, whatever was revealed to me was something that I knew as a truth. Now, the interesting thing is that I didn't know what to do with that truth necessarily. So, something happened, and it feels to me, looking back and reflecting on those 7 or 8 years now, is that it's taken time for that small enlightenment experience or large R realization moment to become embodied. So it happened, and there was significant, not even significant, there was massive change in everything changed, which we've heard a lot in the 3P, but it took time for it to feel like it was part of me. I'm not sure, it's a challenge to articulate these things, right? But, you know, this experience occurs, massive change happens, and then it wasn't until time started clicking by, or the years started clicking by, that it felt like, oh, okay, I really truly understand this. And even more so than just understand it, Karen, but that it became a truth. So it happened as a truth, but it didn't really become part of me as a truth until some passage of time, until I was able to sort of make sense of it.
For me, I've never heard of something like that, something working so fast, so magical. Yeah.
Right.
So for those who have the addiction to alcohol,
Mhm.
right? So in one sentence, how would you describe the cause of their addiction, or any kind of addiction, alcohol, drugs? What is the cause of addiction in one sentence?
I suppose what comes to mind, what came to mind right away, so I'll share that, is a fundamental misunderstanding of where our experience comes from. But I wasn't able to see that until after the fact, right? So whatever causes someone's addiction, I mean, I can say, yes, what caused my addiction ultimately was a misunderstanding of how my world is created. Whether that's useful for someone, I don't know. Like,
And how is their world created? What is creating their world?
well, I mean, the movement of thought, the movement of universal energy. I mean, Sid Banks calls it mind, thought, and consciousness. The interplay of those three things, which are really one thing, and their misunderstanding. So what creates that reality? I would say, in a nutshell, what creates that reality is, or what creates our reality is the belief in the thought that we're having. So for me, when I heard myself say to myself, or other people say to me, that I wasn't worthy, or that I wasn't this or wasn't that, it was my belief in those words. It was my belief in those thinking that made it real for me. Right. So once I saw that the content of my thinking, or the content of what other people said to me, wasn't who I am, that fell away.
So is it something that's in the mind, right? Not in the body?
Well, I think it starts from the mind, as I say, with that misunderstanding. And then, depending on what kind of an addiction we're talking about, it can feel very real and very physical, very, very fast, right? The need for, for anyone who's been an addict, you spend enough time in that world, and, your body needs things. Now, whether that's true or not is a different conversation. But yeah, as I said, it begins from the perspective of hindsight. I can say that it begins with a misunderstanding. What causes that misunderstanding? Attachment to what's going. What causes that misunderstanding is a lack of a fundamental lack of understanding about the role that our thinking, about the power we have to create the world that we live in via our thinking. So once we get that, then we have a choice. We can either wield that power in our benefit, or we can wield it against us. Prior to seeing this, there was no choice, right? So someone could have told me, it's all in your thinking. And the likelihood is that I wouldn't have heard it. So some combination of the conditions being right, something about me being in the right place, something about me being open to hearing something, were really what contributed to the possibility of change.
So for those who are caught up in this logical understanding of the principles, or this inside out understanding, that is, our thinking is causing us all the problems. So how can they have the shift or the insight to just overcome the addiction?
I don't know that I can answer that, Karen. I mean, our thinking is the creative. It's the paintbrush that we paint with, right? So we can paint ourselves. We can use that palette to paint something beneficial to us. We can use that palette to paint something that's not beneficial to us. Like I said, there's a choice there. How can someone? I don't know how to answer that. What I can say is that, for people that have had any kind of experience that shifts their perspective, whether it's big or small, right? What I can say with some confidence is that once you experience that shift, large or small, the work is done. And what I mean by that is that there's nothing more to do. The shift has happened. And in my experience, what I've noticed, so for me, it happened very, very suddenly, and then it has continued. But what I've noticed in its continuance, Corinne, is that the more that I allow what I touched to become real, the more real it becomes for me. So, what can I say to someone who is in addiction or in any situation where they want change? I don't know that there's an answer to that question, if I'm really honest. I mean, I think that being gentle with yourself can be a way there. I think being kind with yourself can be a step in the right direction, but I don't buy into this idea that you can give someone an insight. So if I was talking to someone who was struggling with addiction, what would I point them to? I would point them to moments when they've experienced their wholeness. I would point them to the exceptions in their life. And what I mean by that is I would point them to the times in their life where they have felt like they wanted to feel, which is good. And if they can see that despite their struggles, whether it's addiction or anything else, if they can see the exceptions, that's a place to build from, right? Because we can expand the exceptions. But how do you package realization and say, here you go, here's one for you, here's one for you? I don't know if I could do that, Karen. Well, that would be cool. But I think a good starting place, like I said, if I was going to, and I don't coach around addictions, but I do coach around habit change, right? And on one level, an addiction, what it requires is habit change. It's a perspective change. So to help facilitate that in people, the thing that I always point to is the exceptions. When was the experience you're having right now that you do not like not happening? Oh, it wasn't happening yesterday. Oh, that's interesting. Tell me more about that. So I think the way to support people in changing their perspective or enabling the greatest potential of them to have a shift is to point to what's known for them already, what's true for them already, and to try to, in some way, shape, or form, facilitate their ability to see that whatever struggle they're having in this particular moment is not happening 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. So I call those exceptions. So I think that's a really good place to start from. Right? Yeah, it's interesting. It's interesting questions.
Great. Well, that just clicked in my mind.
Oh, cool.
Yeah.
What clicked?
Yeah, well, the question that when was that thing that you don't like was not happening?
Mm-hmm.
And it's true, addiction is not like something that is happening all the time,
Mm-hmm.
right?
I mean, it feels like it is.
It feels like, but it's not.
It feels like it is, yeah.
Great. So uh, I'm going to ask you some deep questions, and that is,
Go for it.
yeah, love.
Oh my
Is
goodness.
love an addiction, or is it just love?
So interesting. I was just talking to someone about this the other day. I don't know. Because now we have to define what addiction is. And we have to start defining words if we want to be really accurate about this. But if we're not going to go to that depth, I think the pursuit of anything that you perceive as lacking can be addictive, can become an addiction. So I think that if you are looking for love because you think you do not have it, and you believe that in the having of love, you will feel better, that can be addiction-like. In the bigger sense of love, do I think love can be addicting? No, absolutely not. Because love is really just another way of describing the energy of the universe. And it's my belief that that cannot be addicting. That is just the way that it is. So, what is addictive, by definition, there's a negative connotation, there's a negative impact. Something that is addictive has a negative impact on your life, right? That's sort of part of the definition, either on you or the people around you. So it has this negative connotation. And I think when we start talking about, are you addicted to love? I mean, if it's possible, that's the best addiction to have. Right? If you're going to be addicted to something, be addicted to that, but not because you feel you lack it. I think the trap in there for anything to become addictive is that it's being used as a way to attempt to overcome some perception of lack. So I hope that answers that question. It's kind of a little bit of column A, a little bit of column B.
Great. What I see, like couples being in a relationship
Mm-hmm.
and being unhappy without each other,
Right.
feeling emotionally low,
Right.
sad.
Yes.
So is that an addiction?
Well, big questions, Corinne, big questions.
Addicted to the partner, although they might be toxic, negative, abusive, but you're just addicted to being with them, or addicted to being in a relationship with them.
I think the way that I can answer that question, and I hope this answers the question, is that fundamentally what drives, so someone who's in a relationship and they feel like they can't be away from their partner, or they feel a need for an addiction to, if we want to describe it that way. I think what fundamentally drives that is a dissatisfaction with self, right? So, and I hope this lands right. My wife and I don't need each other. We love each other. We are in love with one another, but we do not need each other. So we come into the relationship, and this is something that we talked about at the start of our relationship 7 years ago now, was that we don't actually need each other. So what I'm pointing at is that in a relationship, when people don't perceive themselves individually as whole, then there's going to be a tendency to try to seek to fill that wholeness, right? They perceive themselves as something missing, right? And our culture probably doesn't help with this, because we describe relationships as people coming together and creating a whole. Well, no, the two people are already whole, and they come together by choice to create something beautiful together. But it's not from a sense of, I don't perceive this as a coming together into completion. It's two things that are complete coming together out of choice, or in love. But maybe love isn't a choice, I don't know. So I think when we start talking about people having a need for a partner, or feeling anxious or anxiety when their partner is away, speaks more to an incompleteness within themselves that they're trying to fill externally. And as soon as you're starting to fill something externally, you're in trouble. Right? Does that resonate? Does that make sense? I hope that was reasonably articulated.
It does. That's exactly what I see. Like especially young couples, almost
Sure.
every single day there's a fight, and they go emotionally low, feeling
Yeah.
sad. And when their partner calls them back, they're super happy.
Right. Right.
Yeah. So I guess it is an addiction when you don't feel you are whole, when you don't feel as complete.
Yeah, I mean, at the very least, whether it's an addiction or not, at the very least, what it is a seeking externally for something that you already have. It's like not being able to see the forest for the trees, right? I don't know that I'm whole. Because I don't
Wow.
know that I'm whole, I look around to make me whole. And because I'm looking around, because I'm spending all of my time looking out into the world for things to make me whole, whether it's the message or whether it's a kiss or whether it's whatever it is, I can't see the fact that I am already whole. So our search for wholeness keeps us away from realizing that we are already whole.
Wonderful. Wonderful. So you're also stating that people can be happy even when they are single.
Sorry. I would say that you better be happy. If you're single and unhappy, you better work on, and I don't mean work on, but you better find a way to cultivate your own happiness before you get into a relationship, particularly if there is an expectation that a relationship will make you whole. Right? So yeah, single people absolutely can be happy. And it's interesting, just on that note, when I found when I was introduced to the teachings of Sydney Banks, I was at the very end of a very destructive. I was not in a good relationship. I was coming out of a good relationship, and I'll qualify that by saying I was in the worst relationship with myself I could ever be in. So I have this experience. Now all of a sudden I feel like I can love anybody and everybody. And I took a year to be single. And I just realized now that in my own way, I was testing what had happened to me, right? Because things changed so dramatically. And then shortly thereafter, I met my now wife. And at the beginning, I was like, no. I have no desire to jump into another relationship. And I took a whole year. And in that whole year, I think my experience started to be, that was the beginning of it becoming embodied. So I started to realize I'm whole. Right. And at the end of that year, it's like, okay, we still like each other. I know I'm whole. Do you know that you're whole? If you know that you're whole and you know that I'm whole and we don't need each other, now we can do something really cool together. Yeah.
Wonderful. And when you say we don't need each other,
Right.
is it really true? Like when you're really hurt physically and you have to go to hospital, would you say to your partner that I don't need you?
Well, that's, skirting the lines of paradox here. I would like to think that if I was really, really hurt and bleeding all over our floor, that my wife would decide it was a good idea to take me to the hospital. So, I mean, where do we draw the distinction between, yeah, I need you to pick me up at this address at this time because my car is being repaired. And even then, do I need that to happen? No, I could take a cab, I could walk, I could get an Uber, I could, ride a bicycle. So, the way that, funny question, the way that we describe it for ourselves is that we do things because we want to, not because we feel compelled to. So, if my wife, there was a snowstorm here in Ontario, here in Guelph recently, tons of snow, ice rain. She took the train into work because it was dangerous to drive, came back, and she was at the train station. It's 11 o'clock at night. It's snowing, it's sleeting, it's crappy out. Does she need me to pick her up? No, it's a 10-minute walk. Did I want to do that for her? Yeah, of course. So I don't know. It's interesting when we start to draw the line, would she, if I broke my leg, do I need her to take me to the hospital? I don't know. I could call my son. And if that doesn't work, I need a way to get there. How that particular need gets fulfilled. Yeah, we'll see. Right. But the essence of it is that there's no compulsion. There's no, I don't seek fulfillment of myself in the relationship. I don't seek my own fulfillment from her. Right. So that's the perspective. I mean, I appreciate the joke. That's the perspective that I sort of see that from, is no, I don't need her to fulfill any aspect of me. Right. Yeah, I just like to think she'd take me to the hospital if I was badly hurt. I'll have to ask her that and see if it stands up.
Well, that's just the language, right? You don't need the person to make you feel as a whole. You need them for the basic things, to cook for you, to take you to the hospital in case of emergency, but you don't need them to make you feel as whole, right?
Yeah, exactly. So I think, again, speaking from my own experience, prior to 2015, I did not see myself as whole. I mean, on some level, I knew I was, but I didn't know it. I didn't know it the way Sid would say. I didn't know it with a capital K. I just kind of knew it kind of small. And I guess I'm fine. Yeah, there's just something about, I mean, even needing, as you said, sort of to cook for it, to pick up, even there, and maybe I just have an issue with the word, need. Yeah, I don't know. I kind of lost my train of thought there. Kind of reel me back in.
I mean, it's just the language. Like,
right.
There's a perception behind every single thing.
Right.
When I say need, I know what I mean by that.
Yeah.
Yeah. And when someone else says need, they know what they mean by that, right?
That's right. Yes. Yeah.
Yeah. Wonderful. Wonderful.
Yeah, I think where that maybe, especially in relationships, where that gets confusing, or where it might get confusing, is the this perception that something lacking can be fulfilled in an external way or from an external factor. Right? I need to do this in order to. I need to do this so that I can. Right? At least in my experience, I lived in the, I call it when this, then that. So when this happens, then I'll be whole. When this comes along, I'll be whole. When the right woman comes along, I'll be whole. And what I realized eventually was I am whole. And coincidentally, that's when the right woman came along. Right? If I don't have the experience, so this is hindsight, I'm telling myself a story, but I like the story. So if I don't have my experience in 2015, there's no way that I meet the woman I'm married to now. Right. There's just no way that could have been that this quality type of person, that this kind of individual would ever have been allowed in my life. So without me realizing that I was whole first, it was impossible to have what I have now.
Wonderful. So it's like you attract the person that you are. If you feel as whole, you attract the same kind of person who feels whole. If you feel low, you feel that kind of person.
I think so.
Yeah.
I mean, that's sort of my experience of it. Yeah. That the realization of wholeness has to come first. Right. And once that happens, then the world just starts to look really different. The potential and possibility that exist in the world become much more evident. Right. I mean, we all know that when we're feeling down, low mood, even from a perspective of being whole, when I'm in a low mood, my possibilities shrink. Well, I still know I'm whole, but when I'm not quite seeing it clearly, when I'm caught up in the thinking, my potential and possibilities shrink. When I allow myself that wholeness, when I allow myself the enjoyment, the connection, when I feel it, possibilities emerge, right? Potential comes along. So yeah, as you said, you allow a reflection of who you are into your life. I like that. That was nice. Well said.
Beautifully said. You allow the reflection of who you are in your life. You attract that, right?
Yeah, you attract that. Yeah, and those are almost synonymous to me, um attracting and allowing are feel very similar to me, right?
True.
Anyway,
Mm.
yeah, I'm glad we're not talking about that though, Karen, because I'd really have to think about that more.
Cool. Oh, I'm from India, and I see so many people waking up early in the morning, like at 4 or 5, going to a wine shop, buying like cheap alcohol and drinking it as the first thing in the morning.
Yeah.
So, is it an addiction that they just drink so early in the morning? They even like the income that they earn, they don't give to their family. They drink,
Mhm.
they beat, and physically or emotionally abuse their partner, their family. So, what is wrong with them? Is it the poverty that is causing them the addiction, or is it something else?
Yeah, again, big question, right? Sort of two questions. Why do they have the behavior that they have, and what causes it, right? And where does addiction fit into that? I like my visceral reaction to that question is what they've innocently become addicted to is what they've innocently become addicted to is the hopefulness of recapturing the feeling that they used to get when they first started their addictive behavior. So everything we do, as Dominic would say, or as Abraham would say, we do with the intention that it will make us feel better. So this person who gets up at 4 o'clock in the morning, goes out and gets some cheap alcohol and drinks it. At one point, that made them feel better. And it's that continual reaching for that thing and that continual efforting to try to feel better that becomes the addiction itself. So the alcoholic is drinking to try to recapture that initial experience where it made them feel better. It, is kind of how I see that, and in my own drug use experience as well, right? So I said earlier that I was taking drugs, that I became an addict because I was trying to escape my reality. I was trying to feel better. I was trying to fill a hole. So at first, it feels great. So of course, what feels good, you want more of. And then over time, it takes more and more and more of it to feel the same way you used to. And then eventually, of course, you can't get enough to ever feel that way again. So what feels true to me is that the addiction is actually that craving for how it made you feel the first time, which is all innocent. It's this innocent, born from this innocent desire to feel better. So is it the poverty? No, because there are lots of people that are poor that aren't addicts, right? There are lots of addicts who are very well off. So again, I think we have to point to, some level of dissatisfaction, some fundamental misunderstanding of self that leads us to look externally for things. And one of the ways to fill that void externally is to use drugs, because drugs and alcohol in the short term make you feel good. It's just they don't do that indefinitely. So you have one drink, the guy in the morning gets up 4 o'clock, has a drink, feels good. Day 2 drinks, feels good. By the end of the week, or by the end of the month, or by the end of a year, he can't drink enough to ever feel good. And then somehow that behavior gets manifested outwardly in destructive action. And again, I'm not an expert on this, so please don't hold me to these things. This is very much, opinion and my experience, right?
Exactly. It's like, it's not the alcohol or the drug, it's the feeling that they get by drinking them or consuming them, right? And why do they want that feeling? Is because some life problems that they might be going through. And those problems are in the form of thinking that they
Mhm.
want to get rid of. And this
And
is when
again,
they, yeah.
yeah, no, Karen, I agree with you. What I want to do is make the point that it's easy for us to see that from where we are now. But for someone who's experiencing that, it's very difficult to see. Right. So for us now as non-addicts, or maybe you've never been I don't know, it's easy to look back and say, well, of course it's thought. Duh. Yeah, it's thought. It's misunderstanding. But I think that's a little callous. I mean, it may be true, right? It is true. And I also think that's a hard assessment, you know. Well, it's just your thinking. And I'm not saying that that's how we're describing it, right? But someone who doesn't have the understanding, someone who doesn't know that, they're, I guess what I'm trying to say, Karen, is that for the person who's stuck in that kind of habitual behavior, they're doing the best they can with the tools that they have. You know, they're doing the very best they can to try to feel better. And the only way they know how to do it is in a way that unfortunately in the long term is destructive for them and those around them. So I think it's important for us talking about it with the benefit of hindsight to point out that their behavior in the pursuit of what makes them feel better is an innocence. They're pursuing this because they believe it will make them feel better. And there's an innocence to that that I think is worth pointing out, is worth considering, right? It's not done with deliberate intent. My belief is that it's not done deliberately. It's done out of innocence.
Exactly. They're doing the best they can, given the
Yeah.
thinking they have.
Yeah, exactly. With their they do the best they can from the level of understanding. If you want to go all Sid Banks, they do the best they can from the current level of consciousness that they're able to access. You know, and as we know, from a lower level of consciousness, it's very hard to make good decisions. And I can't think of a lower level of consciousness than not understanding that you are whole and complete. I can't think of something worse than that.
True, true. And when they have an insight or a shift in their thinking, life changes for them. It's just the thinking that's causing them all the behaviors. When they have different thinking, there will be a different behavior.
So something that I've noticed is, or something that is true for me, is that you asked me before about, enlightenment or realization. In either case, I think if that is real, then there is actual witnessable change, right? So if you say that I've had this big realization around alcohol, there should be a noticeable change in your behavior in the world of form. Realizations occur in the abstract, right? They occur, we'll call it spiritually. They're outside of the world of form. If it's real, it will change how you are in form. And if it doesn't change how you are in form, I question what's happened. So Sid Banks had an enlightenment experience and it changed how he was in form. My experience that I happened changed how I act in form noticeably. I mean, I changed my job. I changed a ton of stuff. So I guess yeah. Oh yeah. It took me 4 years. It took me 4 years to change my job, but I knew I was done. I owned a business at the time. I owned a gym at the time. And in 2015, I knew I was done. I could have walked away from it then. I didn't. I waited. I shouldn't have, in hindsight. But yeah, with new thinking, with new thinking, with a shift in perspective, the hope is that is demonstrable, that actually makes a difference in your life, in the world as we live it in form. Otherwise, it's just happening here. Well, so what I'm saying is that deep realization manifests itself outwardly in the world that you live in. And if it doesn't manifest itself out in the world that you live in, then maybe the realization was something else, or maybe not enough time has passed for it to become embodied. I don't know. But I think that's part of it. I think part of the realization process is its manifestation in form. Some kind of noticeable form change or change in
Wonderful.
form. Yeah.
Exactly. From formless to form.
Yeah. I mean, that's a simple
Yeah.
way of saying it, isn't it? Yeah. And if it doesn't go from formless, so what I'm saying is it occurs in the formless, but it actually has to make its way to form. And if it doesn't
Mhm.
make its way to form, well, then it's just thinking. Right? Like it has to make its way into the world. It has to be expressed. The realization has to be expressed through you into form. Otherwise, I don't know, what's it doing?
But I guess when the shift happens, it just happens. When the wisdom guides you for the insight, it just happens.
Exactly. And I guess what I'm wondering about is the permanence of it. Right? Like I have a deep realization, but there's no change in my life. Well, did I really have a deep realization if there's no noticeable change, if there's no actual change in my life? So for me, there's something about it moving. It's like it occurs and it moves through you and is noticeable. I remember a story from the early, some of my early investigations, and they were just something that I heard that Sid sort of talked about, and that was, if you hear something, if you see something, that's great. Carry on with your life. If someone notices that you've changed and they ask you about it, then tell them about it. So in that is this idea that a shift in perspective has to manifest in form. Otherwise, the shift didn't really happen. It actually has to be observable, witnessable. It has to come into form,
Wonderful.
Yeah.
All right, Michael. It's been a great time with you.
Yeah.
And those who would like to follow you,
Mm.
where can they find you?
The easiest way is through insightbasedcoaching.com. I have a Facebook group called the Roundtable Coaching Life and the Three Principles. But the easiest way is through the website at insightbasedcoaching.com. Yeah.
All right. Wonderful.
Cool. Yeah. Thanks,
And
Corinne. This has been fun.
thank you. Any last words for the audience?
My last words are going to be something along the lines of you have everything you need. Recognize your miraculousness. Allow your miraculousness. I don't know. Maybe my last words is I love you all.
All right.
So we'll make that the last words, Karan.
All right. Wonderful, Michael. Thank you very much for giving us your time and sharing this wonderful understanding with us. And we'll see you soon. Thank you.
Appreciate it. Thank you, Karan. Thank you.